Welcome to Skytech-Lens. President Trump's sudden move to double steel and aluminum tariffs to 50% triggered an industrial shockwaves still reverberating today. By August 1st, a 35% tariff on Canadian exports. Outside USMCA pushed tensions in a full-blown trade war. Territory Canada struck back. Prime Minister Mark Carney slammed the door, rerouting steel to Europe and Asia and unleashing clean tech investment at home. Detroit's factories froze. Alberta sealed its supply lines. This isn't just about metal, it's a seismic shift in power trade and auto manufacturing across North America. 1. Tariffs to turmoil, when protection backfires. Tariffs to turmoil, when protection backfires. What started as a bold move to revive U.S. industry quickly spiraled into disruption. Earlier this summer, President Trump doubled tariffs on imported, a claim Prime Minister Carney dismissed as disconnected from reality. The market response was immediate. Nucor raised hot-rolled coil prices to $900 per ton, a $150 jump in 2 weeks. U.S. automakers like Ford, GM and Stellantis were blindsided with each F-150 requiring a ton of steel in Canada, supplying up to 12 million tons annually. Detroit's steel pipelines snapped overnight. Canadian steel orders dried up. Rail shipments halted by mid-July. Ford's River Rouge plant idled too, stamping lines. The S&P 500 dipped 0.75%, with traders calling it Trump's metal recession. Across the Detroit River, a border that had long symbolized shared prosperity, a new reality was setting in. In Windsor, Ontario, a city whose heartbeat was synchronized with Detroit's auto industry, that anxiety was palpable. The streets, lined with auto shops and supply chain businesses, felt the tremors from across the water. For families whose livelihoods were woven into the fabric of the Big Three, the news from Michigan was devastating. Fourth-generation Ford worker Kristen Lawton voiced a collective sentiment, calling it a life-changing fear. It was the dread of seeing a century of industrial heritage crumble. As Michigan's unemployment rate soared to 5.4%, the highest in the nation, the ripple effect was immediate. In Windsor, where thousands crossed the Ambassador Bridge for work each day, every percentage point felt like a personal blow. The symbiotic relationship that had defined the region for generations was now a source of profound vulnerability. But just 200 miles east, a different story was unfolding. While Detroit's industrial engine sputtered, the furnaces of Hamilton, Canada's steel capital, roared with new purpose. This wasn't a coincidence, it was the result of a deliberate, strategic pivot by Ottawa. For decades, Canada had been a reliable, almost subordinate supplier to the American industrial machine. Now, it was repositioning itself as a gatekeeper of critical resources and advanced manufacturing. The Canadian government was no longer just playing defense, it was rewriting the rules of the game, leaving a stunned Motor City scrambling to understand the new landscape. This wasn't merely a response to an economic downturn, it was the opening move in a high-stakes geopolitical chess match. A calculated pivot designed to secure Canada's economic sovereignty for the 21st century. And as the world watched the fallout in the auto sector, Canada's next move was already in motion. And it was just as bold. Carney's Steel Gambit, clean tech meets cold strategy. The plan was dubbed Carney's Steel Gambit. If the American tariffs were a blunt instrument, a show of brute economic force, Canada's reply was a masterclass in precision strategy. It wasn't about retaliation, it was about reinvention. Within 48 hours of the U.S. announcement, Prime Minister Carney's government unveiled a stunning $1 billion federal initiative. The goal, to rapidly decarbonize Canada's steel industry, transforming it into the world's first major producer of green steel. By leveraging cutting-edge technology and abundant clean energy, Canada aimed to make its steel not just tariff-proof, but future-proof. Canada's steel belt was in crisis, struggling against a flood of cheap foreign imports. Carney's government responded with a bold modernization strategy, overhauling its steel belt by replacing antiquated coal-fired furnaces with state-of-the-art electric arc and green hydrogen-powered systems. This wasn't just a facelift, it was a technological revolution for Canadian steel. But this ambitious green transition was more than just clean energy. The genius of the plan lay in its strategic foresight. Carney understood that in a world increasingly concerned with climate change, clean production could be leveraged as a powerful economic tool. It was geopolitical chess, designed to turn an environmental commitment into a competitive advantage on the world stage. The first move was defensive. On July 16, Canada imposed steep quotas on steel from non-FTA nations. The policy then took direct aim at the primary source of the dumping problem, hitting all Chinese-origin steel with a flat 25% duty. The message was unambiguous. Canada would no longer be a dumping ground for state-subsidized steel that had undercut its domestic industry. This protective wall gave the industry breathing room. Carney then pledged to preserve Canadian-made steel for all major public infrastructure projects, from housing and pipelines to new transit lines. This created a guaranteed domestic market, ensuring public funds fueled Canadian jobs and supported the industry's expensive technological transition. With its mills now powered by Canada's abundant hydro and nuclear electricity, the country produced some of the greenest steel in the world. This became a decisive trade advantage. As Europe began implementing carbon tariffs on high-emission imports, the pivot paid off. European buyers, eager to avoid these new taxes, flocked to Canadian suppliers. Preparing for the EU's 2026 Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, CBAM rushed in. Canadian steel 93%. Emissions-free qualified for CBAM exemption, unlocking higher prices and faster exports. Carney summed it up. This is no longer about protectionism, this is about positioning. Just like that, the trade war became a clean tech arms race. And as Canada surged forward, Detroit was already losing ground. Hit that like button and subscribe to Piston Pundit for deep dives into global auto dynamics, trade, politics, and powertrain pivots. Now let's roll into what happened next on US soil. 3. Detroit's slide. Outpriced, outpaced, and outmaneuvered. Back on American soil, the situation for Detroit's Big Three was becoming dire. It wasn't just a simple steel shortage, it was a full-blown financial crisis. They were hemorrhaging cash at an alarming rate, caught in a perfect storm of soaring material costs and fractured supply chains. The numbers were staggering. Ford's CEO, Jim Farley, laid it bare before Congress. The proposed 50% steel tariff wasn't just a line item, it was a potential $2.5 billion blow to their bottom line in a single year. Think about their flagship, the F-Series truck. Each one requires a literal ton of steel. With prices skyrocketing to $900 per ton, the math became a nightmare. The company was effectively bleeding over $100,000 every few minutes. This financial pressure rolled directly downhill to the dealerships. Sales floors became tense negotiation grounds as managers were forced to pass the costs on. Suddenly, the sticker price on America's most popular models jumped by $1,500, sometimes even $2,000, almost overnight. Customers were confused and angry, and it wasn't just American-made vehicles. Even trucks assembled in Mexico saw price hikes as high as $2,500 as the entire North American supply chain buckled. This crisis forced a major strategic rethink in boardrooms across Detroit. This brings us to our next point. 4. The global pivot. With domestic production becoming prohibitively expensive, automakers began accelerating their plans to shift sourcing and assembly to countries not impacted by the tariffs. It was a desperate, high-stakes gamble to stay competitive, a global chess move with long-lasting consequences. As 25% squeezing consumers nationwide. But the impact spread further. Texas oil drillers ran out of pipe as Canada redirected its supply domestically. Enbridge resorted to cannibalizing old stock just to keep projects moving. Smaller contractors were frozen out entirely. Congress rushed to intervene. On July 21, senators pleaded with Carney and Ottawa to lift what they dubbed the metal blockade. He refused, offering only limited quotas. His message was clear: cooperate or pay. Canada didn't retaliate with tariffs, it offered better alternatives. Europe embraced its cleaner steel, while Detroit, bound by cost and chaos, fell behind. That global appetite for Canadian steel wasn't accidental. It was part of a much broader realignment in trade, and Canada was steering the wheel. 5. Factory floor fallout, jobs, fear, and fractures. Factory floor fallout. Beyond boardrooms, the trade war is hitting workers where it hurts. In Windsor, Canada's Motor City, auto workers are reliving the trauma of 2008. Kristen Lawton, a fourth-generation Ford employee, says her plant feels like a powder keg. Her entire family works in the auto sector and now everything feels at risk. Manufacturing makes up 19% of Windsor's workforce. Tariffs on steel and parts have already triggered layoffs. Frozen expansion and rattled suppliers across Canada. 500,000 jobs are tied to US-bound exports as orders stopped. The slowdown spread Hamilton's mills to London's welders. US plants relying on Canadian steel now face furloughs to Trump's 35% tariff. Based on shaky fentanyl claims, has fractured labor unity across the border. Canada is pivoting. Exports to the US. But for towns built on cross-border trade, the shift feels like economic whiplash, the emotional toll, all sparked by one policy swing, and that brings us to the final twist. It was a test of long-term vision. Verdict, steel strategy or steel trap. Verdict, steel strategy or steel trap. This trade war was never just about steel, it was about leverage, legitimacy, and long-term vision. But it gave Canada a rare opening with cleaner production, export realignment, and geopolitical foresight. Carney's strategy left Washington scrambling. Today, US automakers face twin thanks for watching the video, and subscribe the channel now for more updates. Thanks.